Good evening, everybody. My name is Mel B, coming to you live from CCN's headquarters here in The Hague. It is good to be with you once again, Midsummer's Day, and it is stonking hot here. Of course, it is Dragonology, and we are heading towards the end of Season 3. It's been an epic seasonal adventure, so I'm going to dive straight into tonight's episode, which is the long-awaited episode 12. Tonight, we're going to be dealing with cult ritualism. Specifically the aspects of cult ritualism that have to do with decoration and adornment. Now, there's several reasons why we get into this particular realm of information, and it might be a bit of a recap on various areas that we kind of trodden down in the past. But what we're trying to establish with everything that we do when we create Dragonology information is tying it into the bigger picture, understanding how everything that we learn about ultimately fits together and interrelates. Now, in order to do that, we every now and then do kind of need to examine our personal programming to understand what's really going on. Even just a moment of silence, seeking a bit of clarity. And in those moments of clarity, perhaps you ask yourself, why do we do what we do? Just daily behaviors. Why do we, for example, get up, brush our teeth, brush our hair, put makeup on, get dressed, go to work? Anything as prosaic as that. And a good example is, why do we wear what we wear? And why do we participate in the activities we participate in? Be it going partying, playing sport, whatever that might be. Obviously, choices I'm talking about here are not necessarily related to needing to work to earn money to survive. I'm talking about the activities we choose to participate in for perhaps distraction, our pastimes, going out for a meal, or watching the theatre. There's very distinctive reasons why our culture has developed in the way that it has. It's not just we flourished and naturally evolved. There has been a very distinctive program that has been put upon the human race, and this is the way we've evolved. And what we're looking at is all the auxiliary activities down the line, focusing on what we get up to on a day-to-day basis and backtracking to see where all of those activities are rooted. And the thing is, when you start to look at it, right, the true reality is that everything we are doing is basically an artificial structure, okay? The answer to the questions over here, okay, why do we do what we do, is because humanity is running on a spell that is very specific in structure, which is programmed into us via ritual. One of the first people to identify this, of course, that there was an underlying structure. Now, this gentleman, Claude Levi-Strauss, was in fact an atheist and a vegetarian. He was one of the people who said that the world would be a better place when people stopped, packing meat into shelves in displays in supermarkets. And he made a very good point of that. But at the same time, he also wasn't a religious man. He was very much an atheist, so it gives you kind of a perspective of his outlook. Very interesting man, Claude Levi-Strauss. Of course, he was Jewish in a time when, in Europe, when he was persecuted for that, stripped of his ability to study at one point, but he has become one of the most foremost anthropologists of our time. And he developed a theory called structuralism, which talks about the structure that I have been exploring through the course of our Dragonology studies, the structure which I call the draconian construct. And this is from someone who's not perhaps very familiar with the whole concept of the dragon culture or Dragonology, or perhaps he is and he just didn't write about it. But what he certainly identified is there is a structure, okay? And this structure very much has, you can actually see it if you learn how the various nodes interact and interrelate with each other. And structuralism has been defined as the search for the underlying pattern of thought in all forms of human activity. In other words, what motivates us? Why is it that we do what we do? In sociology, anthropology, and linguistics, structuralism is the methodology which states that elements of human culture must be understood by way of their relationship to a larger overarching system or structure. It works to uncover the structures that underlie all things that humans do, think, perceive, and feel. Alternatively, As summarized by philosopher Simon Blackburn, structuralism is the belief that phenomena of human life are not intelligible except through their interrelations, and that's very important. These relations constitute a structure, and behind local variations in the surface phenomena, there are constant laws of abstract culture. Okay, constant laws holding things together. Of course, the theory of structuralism was developed by Claude Levi-Strauss, this gentleman over here, the father of modern anthropology. And of course, Dragonology deals a lot with anthropology. In fact, it brings together a great many subjects under one umbrella, which is why it's such a good subject to go into when you start to really look at the origins of human nature, our behavioral patterns, and how we have in fact evolved in an anthropological way. Now, obviously, taking this up a step from where Claude Levi-Strauss left off with his structuralism, he was not wrong in stating that there is a structure, and the way the structure works is not defined by the individual things within the structure, but how those individual things interrelate to each other based upon laws that govern their interrelationship. And when you talk about that, you kind of get an idea of perhaps some of the works we've done in decoding etymology and looking at how various letters relate to each other and what they mean when certain letters are put together. It means something completely different, and how these root words turn up in words and how they interrelate to each other, because on their own, they actually just don't mean anything. A word just stuck out on its own. If it's not in a sentence, generally it's just a bit random. It has a bit more meaning when it is connected to other words which tie into each other through rules of grammar. So it's not the words being the individual nodes, it's how they interrelate to each other which decides what the ultimate meaning and message is that's being communicated. And this is very much how the draconian construct has been set up. The entire structure within which we live is a draconian construct. From our language, to our religions, to our values, to our activities, to the very way we process our thoughts. All this is based on a controlling mechanism which ultimately enslaves humanity and is very distinctly serpentine or dragon-like in nature. And of course, all of our activity is largely based on ritual, because these rituals come from the dragon. And what is it all about? What is the ultimate function and purpose of the draconian construct? Of course, it's about energetic harvesting, as is everything in life. If we just look at our day-to-day activities, of course, in order to live, we have to breathe. We need oxygen, which creates energy in the body. We have to eat, okay? Of course, the breatharians and sun gazers would chime in on this, but I'm not going to extreme New Age practices. I'm looking very realistically at the fact that most people on a day-to-day basis have to eat in order to sustain their bodies. And there is a constant struggle on our planet for resources. Half the world's population aren't able to get enough food to eat because they live in utter poverty. So there is an imbalance in the way energies are sourced and distributed, and in fact taken by force from those who are too weak to defend themselves. And this ultimately is what is going on a perhaps deeper level, in a more existential level, but also on an interdimensional level. Perhaps a lot of people aren't aware because they can't feel it or see it directly. They've not tuned into that yet, but it's going on. For each and every person, there is an aspect of that that is true. Energetic harvesting via the manipulation of humanity as a species is as old as the existence of humanity itself. We were created as a slave species. As I already mentioned, the control structure is very easily understood when you start to look at the way words fit together and the meanings of words. The control of humanity is done through the manipulation of words and language, okay? And of course, humanity's thoughts and thus their actions are constructed of words. You know, when we're thinking about things to do, we think in words. We don't really think in abstract thoughts. For example, my husband being bilingual, multilingual, can speak Dutch and English, but although he's born Dutch, he largely thinks in English. He describes his thoughts as being in English words. So we do generally think in terms of words based upon the language we've been taught, which of course is then based upon rules of grammar and spelling, etc. In fact, it was Philip K. Dick, a famous science fiction author, who wrote the basic tools for the manipulation of humanity is the manipulation of words. If you can control the meaning of words, you can control the people who misuse the words. And as we've been going through the study of Dragonology, we really have been looking at the etymology of some very key words and what they mean in terms of the greater context of the draconian construct, how we are programmed into using specific thoughts and tying them into specific phrases. We associate specific ideas, and therefore we actually subscribe to the very patterns, undulations, and programming mechanisms of the draconian construct. And it is truly masterful when you start to look at just how they have enforced this control paradigm upon humanity in a way that's not even recognizable to the average person who doesn't really take time to understand it. Of course, for those wanting to learn a little bit more about the language aspect, you can decipher the deception for yourself by getting to know how etymology works. And one of my favorite books on the subject, and really this is the Bible of dragon etymology and hidden symbolism of the dragon, it's Pierce Bach's book, Murder of Reality, which I've read to death several times, dog-eared, lots of notes in the margin. And a quote from Pierce Bach, he writes in this book, "Language is like an encryption key. Initiation permits one to access knowledge at a security clearance level. Understanding words is a means of bypassing the guards and stealing the security card." So understanding the true meaning of words enables us effectively to decipher the deception of this reality for ourselves, because it is a construct, it is an illusion which is created by the thought forms that we project out. And those thought forms are largely controlled through controlling our language. Now, structuralism in relation to literature is interesting, because now taking the work of Claude Levi-Strauss and obviously applying it to the world of literature. And it's interesting because in literary theory, structuralist criticism relates literary text to a larger structure, which may be a particular genre, arranged with intertextual connections, a model of a universal narrative structure, or a system of recurrent patterns or motifs. Structuralism argues that there must be a structure in every text, which explains why it is easier for experienced readers than for non-experienced readers to interpret the text. Hence, everything that is written seems to be governed by specific rules or a grammar of literature that one learns in educational institutions and that are to be unmasked, as these rules of grammar are rules of the draconian construct and hide a much deeper meaning. So now let's look at the actual words and their meanings. And of course, the best word to start off with is writing, because we're talking about literature and we're talking about ritual. That was the introduction of this show. It's going to be about cult ritualism and the activities under cult ritualism. And I want to do a little bit of a recap here, because for those who kind of have been following Dragonology, you understand that writing is a ritual, okay? Writing was initially started to record rituals and to record heptamancy. For example, you would have a seer who, or one of these priestesses who would read the organs or entrails of a sacrifice. That's called heptamancy, for example, when they read the livers. And they would then record what they had seen on a clay liver, make little markings about what they had interpreted or read or the spell that they had done. And it gets recorded. And that is initially how the act of recording things started. It started with the recording of readings and spells. And then, of course, there was things like inventory and recording number of lives lost in wars and number of soldiers taken to war. It was started with record keeping, initially with spells, and then moved more into an inventory function. But as the writing developed through the ages, you've got to remember that ultimately it started as a ritual-related activity, okay? And this can be seen in the fact that the word writ, okay, the words writing and ritual contain the dragon root word R-I-T, writ. And in fact, all languages come from a common root. And particularly when you're talking about the Proto-European, Indo-European languages, those that evolved from Sanskrit. And I'll give you an example of just how these words have evolved. But it's interesting to notice that Sanskrit, which is possibly the language from which Latin came, and then from Latin you've got all the European languages. You've got Italian, you've got Spanish, you've got Portuguese, you've got English, you've got French, German. All of those evolved from Latin, but Latin evolved from Sanskrit. And look, in the word Sanskrit again, the original progenitor of the Indo-European languages, you have the RIT root. And of course, Sanskrit, the letters and expressions are very different to what we know the Latin alphabet today. It looks something like this, but it's interesting to notice that the basics of Sanskrit have transferred through into other languages. And here is a good example of the similarities in vocabulary indicating the close relationships between select Indo-European or Aryan languages. Now, I'll give you an example of some of these. For example, father, we talk about in Dragonology how the F and the V sometimes transliterate out, because over here it's easy to see how the F turns into the V in German, because in German and Dutch, the V is phonetically said like an F sound. And it's interesting because the PH is often phonetically said like the F sound as well. And here we've got the P for padre, which is father in Spanish, and of course the Greek being pater, which of course in Latin, pater over here, and then pitar in Sanskrit. You can see the vowel sounds have transliterated out, which is a common rule of grammar. That's one of the rules of grammar that we talk about, is that vowel sounds transliterate out from one language to the next. And again, we've got one, ein, uno, hen, unus, ekam. Show you how these words are very similar to each other. Fire, pure, this is where you get pyromaniac from. And then ignis, in terms of the word ignite. You can see where all these words come from that are related to fire. And then, of course, here, field, campo, which is perhaps where you get the word camp from, because you're camping on grass or out in the bush. And then agros is in agrarian or agriculture. Interesting to notice. Right. Sun, son, okay, you can see like the son of God, S-O-N over there. Sol in Spanish, Helios in Greek, Sol in Latin, and Surya in Sanskrit. And then king is interesting because it shows you the variations, as we've spoken about many times in Dragonology. Basileus, of course, the basilisk being a dragon, meaning the king of serpents. Rex and Raja, right, which is the Sanskrit version of Rex. And then we've got, of course, the word God, which translates into Gott in German. And what's interesting to notice as well is when you start looking at the other words that we've spoken about in Dragonology, very interesting, we've covered them all off. Theos in Greek, T-H-E is a reference to God. Deus and divas, okay? And that's where you get divine, divination, and all that kind of thing from. The divine right. It's rooted in the Sanskrit word divas, a Sanskrit word for God. And then, of course, in all these cultures, you get the most common and oldest symbol, one of the oldest conceptual images we know, which is, of course, referenced as the swastika. Actually, it was called the swastika in Madame Blavatsky's book, which was written long before the Nazis came into power. So it's not a Nazi symbol. The symbol goes back into ancient antiquity and has a multi-layered symbolic allegory. And talking about how languages interrelate and how the rit root is so relevant, let's talk about this a bit more. Let's show you exactly just how, it's not a fluke that Sanskrit has the root word rit in it. Well, the Hebrew word which references the Hebrew language is called ivrit, also containing the rit, dragon root word. Okay, ivrit means Hebrew in Hebrew. And of course, this little demonstration, which just further nails home this point and just gives more evidence to the fact that language was given to us by the dragons. Okay, the etymological evidence suggests that English is the language of the angels. Let's unpack this. The Dutch word for English, of course, being Engels. The Dutch word for angels is also Engels. It's the same damn word, right? Here we go. French word for English, Anglais. And what you've got is the root word, eng, being swapped out, the A and the E. The Spanish word for English is Inglés. Now, here you've got the I being transliterated out. Remember, the vowel sounds can transliterate out with each other, but it's the same basic root. And, of course, the Latin word for English is Anglicus, using, again, the same A root as you find in the French English, which is Anglais. Now, what's interesting to notice here is the ANG root. This is a very common root. This is the angelic root. It's the root of angel. Okay, and as we know, angels and dragons are the same things. In fact, the word angel comes from the Latin words anguiem or angui, and anguin and angui are Latin words for serpent. And if you start to have a look, you've got the ANGU, language, okay? The word language, even when we're talking about words, has this ANGU root, the same as angui, okay? Very, very interesting, and it's not a coincidence. There's a very distinctive reason for this. So let's take a look at the definition of ritual. Part of this is from Wikipedia, and of course, part of it I had to correct a few things. A ritual is defined as a sequence of activities involving gestures, words, and objects performed in a sequestered place and performed according to a set sequence. Rituals may be prescribed by the traditions of a community, including a religious community. Rituals are characterized but not defined by traditions of a community. Rituals are characterized but not defined by formalism, traditionalism, invariance, rule governance, sacred symbolism, and performance rituals are a feature of all known human societies. They include not only the worship rites and sacraments of organized religions and cults, but also rites of passage, atonement, and purification rites, oath of allegiances, dedication ceremonies, coronations, presidential inaugurations, marriages, and funerals, school rushes, traditions, and graduations, club meetings, sporting events, Halloween parties, veterans parades, Christmas shopping, gift wrapping, trick-or-treating, feasting, and fasting. Many activities that are ostensibly performed for concrete purposes, such as jury trials, execution of criminals, and scientific symposia, are loaded with purely symbolic actions prescribed by regulation or tradition, and thus are ritualistic in nature. Even common actions such as shaking hands and saying hello may be termed as a ritual. Ritual is that which to an outsider may seem irrational, non-contiguous, or illogical. Okay, so let's look at the etymology of the word ritual, because it's interesting. Again, we've got the Sanskrit root turning up here. We have an origination of the word ritual coming up in Sanskrit. The English word ritual derives from the Latin word ritualis, that which pertains to rite or ritus. In Roman traditional and religious usage, ritus was the proven or set structure. Again, the word structure. We're talking about structuralism. The set structure of doing something. Okay, so these rules are involved. The original concept of ritus may be related to the Sanskrit RTA. Okay, the word is RTA, Rita, meaning visible order in Vedic religions, being the lawful and regular order of the normal, and therefore proper, natural, and true structure of cosmic, worldly, human, and ritual events. So ritual coming from the Rita root based in Sanskrit, which Sanskrit has the root word rit in it, from ritual. Very, very interesting. So the usage of the word ritual, let's have a look at that. And of course, this is a Catholic ritual, which I won't get into, but the chalices and the smoke, all very ritualistic. The word ritual is first recorded in English in around 1570 and came into usage in the 1600s to mean the prescribed order of performing religious services, or more particularly a book of these prescriptions. And in fact, I just want to go back here where we talk about how ritual to an outsider may seem irrational or illogical, someone who's not part of that culture, okay? That's very interesting because it's so irrational and because it's so illogical to someone who's not part of that culture. Ritual leaves a distinctive archaeological signature. So we're going to look at the archaeological signature of ritual, and this is a piece taken from the opening lines of a paper by Professor Sheila Coulson, the Associate Professor of Archaeology at the University of Oslo in Norway. And it states, it has been proposed that collective ritual with its formal characteristics of amplified, stereotypical, redundant display might be expected to leave a loud archaeological signature. Now, that's very interesting because for those who have been following my Dragonology Origins line of research, which of course brought about the development of the Secrets of the Kalahari documentary, you'll be very aware that the oldest ritual site to have yet been discovered, of course, is in Sedilo Hills in the Kalahari Desert. And of course, this giant effigy of a serpent, carved stone serpent, is inside this one cave where it seems that there was ritual activity going on, as described by Sheila Coulson. So this is possibly the oldest evidence we've ever found of ritual activity, but we've not found any evidence of any other activity at all, apart from painting. There's a lot of cave paintings around there, okay? So there is a lot of, there is more evidence of ritual activity going on there than there is any sign of active kind of habitation in certain parts, particularly in this cave. So, or any other activities apart from what is needed to survive, so hunting, sourcing water, whatever else. Ritual, because of the fact that it takes so much effort, and they build these monumental temples. That's why you find the ruins of temples like Göbekli Tepe, because these places were so special and they leave a large archaeological signature. Ritual is such a big part of our culture that it does leave a large archaeological signature, which is why you can trace it, why you can find it, and that's where you can identify sort of the anthropological story of humanity. Now we start getting on to ritual adornment. As we mentioned, we're going to be talking about ritual decoration and adornment. And why do we do what we do? Why do we participate in the activities we participate in? Why do we hang Christmas lights up over our house and on our trees at Christmas time? Why do we wear, white dresses at a wedding? Why do we do the things we do? Okay. Why do we adorn ourselves? Why do we put makeup on in the morning? Why do we, engage in the multi-million-dollar hairdressing industry and put lots of products in our hair? Why do we do the things we do? Okay, the adornment aspect pertaining to the external, trying to represent something. Here we go. Temples adorned with idols. We're starting with temples because, as we say, temples where rituals are performed, you find ruins of them absolutely everywhere. And often they're adorned with many, many dragon and serpent symbols. And of course, Hindu religion is no exception. You've got lovely cobras all over here. The temples of worship are often adorned and decorated. Churches have the most incredible stone masonry carvings. And I mean, just go to the Vatican and just see how ostentatious that place is. It seems to be that adornment of the temples is part of a ritualized worshipping and celebration of the deities or gods. Acts, as we say, acts of adornment are part of an act that is distinctly ritual. So decorating a temple with by putting a god on top of it is a distinctly ritual act. And of course, this takes us on to the subject of idol worship, where we, for example, in Hinduism, a murti literally means any form, embodiment, or solid object, and typically refers to an image, statue, or idol of a deity or person in Indian culture. By the prana pratishtha ceremony, the idol becomes identical with the deity and receives the same worship. So perhaps we've been told to sacrifice gold to the gods. You kind of have, instances where you have stone statues having gold laid before them as an example. And other things as well, food, spices, the first harvest, the first fruits, we've gone through all that, perhaps even the firstborn. And of course, fine fabrics and silks. And there's a lot of adorning of the idols as well. So not just adorning of the temples, but adorning of the idols as a representation of a god or deity, as is spoken about by this prana pratishtha ceremony, where we now look at the idol and see that as the embodiment of God, okay? As a representation of the god or deity, it is common in various religious traditions that idols are adorned or decorated as part of the worship and ritual. And here's an example I've used before, of course, is the Buddhist gold leaf offering. It's an adornment of an idol with gold, and they are offering gold to this idol. Just look how thick the gold is lumped up on top of this Buddhist statue. It's incredible. This one's in Burma, in Myanmar province. I mean, it's just incredible. And so many people have come along and literally laid layers upon layers of gold leaf onto this Buddha statue and adorned it with gold. And of course, the whole concept of adornment and decoration goes into the churches and to the Christianic religions as well. Decorating churches with statues and, again, as we say, angels are dragons, dragons are angels. Here we go, dragon symbolism in churches, beautifully carved, all of them with a different expression or a different pose. And of course, this is in the Vatican, probably the most ostentatious building in the world, the biggest Catholic church in the world as well, and just ridiculously decorated and ornamented. And it is the perfect example of excessive ornamentation. I mean, with so many people starving in the world and suffering, yeah, we're going to just go put layers of gold, upon statues in the Vatican, and this is what they've done. And not only that, there's an amazing artworks from all the Grand Masters, Michelangelo, carvings, marble sculptures, beautiful artworks. And this, of course, is an incredible one indeed, again, with angels being representations of dragons. And of course, there's the other version of the idols, which is the mummies, okay? The mummification process is a form of adornment, but not just the wrapping and embalming process. They actually would put the jewelry onto the mummies and put them into beautifully carved chests, and of course the organs were taken out and put into canopic jars. And in their tombs, the tombs were adorned with all their possessions in gold and such like. In fact, the tomb of Tutankhamun had so much gold possessions. It was something like $380 million worth of stuff that came out of there. But as we see here we go, the gold death mask of Tutankhamun, very famous, but it's literally made of gold and precious metals, and it is an adornment of the dead. This very expensive, ostentatious sort of crypt that a dead person lies in. Again, it's just proof of this whole concept of adorning the dead, which goes into other religions as well. And this is a painting of Anubis, as they're tending to the dead mummy, Anubis, god of the underworld. As I said, this adorning of the dead with jewels and gold and what it goes over into the Catholic religions, because as we know, the Egyptian religion is very clearly acknowledged in the Catholic religion. In fact, the IHS, which you commonly see in Catholic churches, is the representation of Isis, Horus, and Set. So the Egyptian religion being noted in Catholic Church because, of course, it all comes from one common root religion being ophiolatory. So again, notice the adornment, the gold statue adornment, the gold mummy adornment, and this is what we got going in the Catholic Church, adornment of the dead. Catholic saints get just dripped in pearls and gold and rubies and emeralds and jewels and covered with all sorts. And the whole crypt of the Vatican is filled with these sort of people that have kind of had the flesh rot off and then surreptitiously decorated with thousands, if not millions of dollars worth of jewels. Again, adornment of the dead, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, the adornment of the dead then goes into ritual traditions too. It's not just something that we find in the crypts and such like, but we look at Catholic traditions that particularly are prevalent in places like Mexico, such as the Day of the Dead or All Saints Day, which in places like us, parts of California, Mexico, Miami, you've got the recognition of Santa Muerta, Saint Death, which is a feminine skeletal figure which gets adorned. They dress her up, sometimes in a wedding dress, and sometimes they put flowers all over her head. Sometimes they just drape her in lots of cheesy costume jewelry, as we see over here. But also the altar to Santa Muerta is adorned with everything you can imagine in terms of offerings, candles, liquor, incense, anything to adorn your Santa Muerta offering table. Of course, just putting it into context, All Saints Day or Day of the Dead, this is kind of what it looks like. They had an expression of this in the one of the James Bond episodes recently, where they have this parade that goes through the street. And this does happen in parts of Mexico and different parts of the world, where you have this dead walk, they call it. It's where the dead walk, and they have all the skeletons and people dressed up with, all the makeup, the Halloween type makeup, and they go parading through the streets. And this is a tradition which actually very much is linked to Halloween, because Halloween happens on All Saints Eve, the night before All Saints Day. And of course, All Saints Day, they have this parade. But this is kind of what you see are these costumes and puppets going through the street that are all very much related to the concept of death. And although that is the case, they're all adorned, as you notice. Flowers, feathers, hats, they're adorned. Now, ritual adornment. Adornment, as we already spoke about, is very much a part of ritual. And you can see this in films like Eyes Wide Shut. For those who don't know, Stanley Kubrick was murdered after making this film. And 15 minutes of this film were taken off the end because it reveals a little bit too much about what really goes on in these elite secret societies. And you will notice in this film that, of course, all the participants in this ritual at this amazing mansion where this film was made have adornments of robes and masks. They're adorned. They're not there without some kind of adornment on. And of course, ritual adornments are found in various cult groups, not just the kind you see in the movies, but for example, the Ku Klux Klan wear these white hooded robes. That is their ritual vestments, their ritual adornments. Now, just bringing it back into the bigger context of things, okay? Let's look at the whole concept of clothing, because it's just kind of one of those things we take for granted on a day-to-day basis that, we get up, we have a shower or bath, whatever the case may be, we put on clothes, we go out, we do our daily chores, we go to work, whatever the case may be. Clothes are just a given. It's an accepted part of our existence. But, I'm one of those people who, I worked in the fashion industry, and I at one point had just an insane amount of rags hanging in my closet, most of which I never wore. And it's an interesting thing that the obsession with fashion and brands and the external image and how you look, because again, that's all part of the draconian programming, the consumeristic construct. But have you ever stopped to consider for just one moment, if humanity evolved naturally on this planet, why do we need so much protective clothing? Because people will say to me, oh, no, we need the clothing. It's not like that was a program foisted upon us artificially. We need to put something on us to keep us warm in winter. Okay, if you live in Europe, for example, Northern Europe, where I live in Holland, it can get very cold. You'll freeze to death if you don't have something warm on you. We have to have it to survive. It's like you have to eat to survive. You have to breathe to survive. You've got to have something to keep you warm in winter, some clothing. Yeah, to a certain extent, that is true. But no other creature on Earth has anything like a collection of clothing or wardrobe or even a fashion sense. Pigs and ducks don't get up in the morning and go, oh, gee, I wonder what I'm going to wear today. They don't look outside to see whether it's raining or shining as to whether they put on their flip-flops or their Wellingtons. That is a distinctly human characteristic. And there is a very, very good reason for this, okay? Firstly, humans did not evolve naturally as one might have been taught by Darwinism. We did not evolve from monkeys. That kind of evolution would have taken millions of years, and the human genome simply does not go back that far, all right? So we were most certainly genetically manipulated into the creatures that we are now, into the species that we are now. That means we skipped a few nodes in the evolutionary process, but that's also made us an artificial creature within our environment, needing to develop artificial practices such as artificially insulating our bodies with things that don't grow on our bodies or come from our bodies. And use snails, for example. They might grow a shell or take over a shell. Animals, for example, polar bears grow very, very thick fur to protect them. Human beings don't. We need to seek external means of protecting ourselves from the elements. And this goes for the concept of housing too. I mean, apart from maybe those who burrow into the ground or build a nest, human beings are the only creatures that have the kind of living structures that are as advanced as we have, okay? So the things which protect us in a physical sense, the clothing, the roof over our head, those things, those artificial things, we obviously have to put around us. It's not naturally provided to us. And that's because, again, it just brings into more proof into the context of the fact that humanity is an artificially created species who did not evolve naturally on this planet. And although used for protection, clothing is a form of ritual adornment and decoration. And that's very much true when you get to understand the concept of fashion industry, which I will get into now because it's a very interesting road. Like everything, like Hollywood, the fashion industry too has a very, very dark soul. So adornment and decoration in the form of jewelry, clothing, makeup, accessories. I mean, there's a whole multi-billion dollar industry built upon creating the external locus of identity, okay? The adornment factor, the decoration factor, the fashion factor, whether it's, putting some gel in your hair or some curlers or putting some lipstick on or putting on some bangles and pearl necklaces. All of this activity is ritual behavior. The original concept of adornment is rooted in ritual. People used to adorn themselves for ritual originally. That's where it came from. Fashion culture. Much of our fashion culture, our modern day fashion culture, is programmed into us through mainstream media, through the images that they use. Fashion culture programming is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to the use of dragon symbols in order to make them fashionable and trendy and more accepted into the human consciousness and into the social psyche. Much like the entertainment industry, the fashion industry has a very dark side and very dark origins too, including the use of sweatshops and slave labor for the creation of much of the mass market garments that you find out there. It's also one of the biggest polluting industries on the planet, the manufacturing of textiles, dyeing, and of course, what we do, which is day-to-day washing with detergents. One of the most polluting factors of our existence is the clothing factor, the rag trade. Okay. Now, the lovely thing about clothing is it's a creative element. You can basically do so much with it, and so much is encoded into our clothing and into, for example, this lovely fashion image with a snake going around there. You'll notice in, for example, this picture of Elizabeth I, which I have spoken about before in great detail, has a symbolic depiction of a snake on her sleeve. Here it is close up, okay? And that'll not be the first time that this particular queen, that is Queen Elizabeth I, has been depicted with a serpent. Okay, serpent symbolism, of course, serpents are representative of the dragon. And you also notice in this picture, in her robes, that there are ears and eyes embroidered or painted on as part of the ritual adornments, the decoration of these robes. And this very much carries through into modern day times, where you have, cult images, cult or dragon symbolism, which is very much being put forward in fashion. A good example of this, of course, being the use of the sugar skull, which is very popular around Santa Muerta or Halloween. These lovely sugar skull designs, which is basically feminine type skulls with pretty stars and hearts and flowers and sparklies all over, and they turn up now absolutely everywhere. Sugar skull designs are very, very popular, and they are getting more popular. You just see them absolutely everywhere. And of course, some of the more sinister designs turn up in fashion too. For example, the all-seeing eyes snuck in at many junctures. You'll see it turning up all over fashion garments and in advertising campaigns and high-end glossy magazines. Now, a good example of how we create the external locus of identity is through the concept of a uniform. A uniform is a type of clothing worn by a member of an organization while participating in that organization's activities. Modern uniforms are often worn by armed forces and paramilitary organizations such as the police, emergency services, security guards, and in some workplaces and schools, of course, and by inmates in prisons. And in some public groups, such as the police, it is illegal for non-members to wear the uniform. And of course, various adornments have symbolic features. We've covered this one off many times and in great detail throughout the course by Dragonology. And that is, of course, the fact that much like a uniform, these guys all wear a very specific hat which marks their function. So too does the Pope wear a very specific hat marking his function. Okay, and this hat is known as the mitre, commonly also referenced as the fish hat. It's the same sort of garment worn by the priests of ancient Babylon, known as Dagon or Oannes, often collectively referenced as the Fisher Kings. They wore this kind of fish-shaped hat, which is very similar to what the Pope wears on his head, which is the mitre. And then, of course, we look at the whole concept of body painting, okay? Tribal adornment rituals, face and body painting. They often did this for rites of passage rituals, harvest time rituals, or even war rituals, rituals of adornment. People would often have rituals before war, make sacrifices so that they had victory in war. Or they painted themselves with war paint. And of course, this is a scene from Braveheart. This is Mel Gibson covered in blue and white paint. And this is the war paint of ancient Indian tribes. And it's interesting to notice that, again, the adornment, the putting on of the paint is part of a ritual. It's part of a ritual function because they have these rituals before they go to war. And in fact, the war itself is a ritual. The concept of ritual adornment then further extends into the whole wearing of masks. Much like one might paint one's face, one might also put on a mask, as you do, for example, as they did in Greek theatre. Here's a nice variation of different types of Greek theatre masks and a modern day expression of perhaps what Greek theatre would have looked like back in the day. And then, of course, when you go from painted faces to masks, you come to makeup. A multi-billion-dollar industry. That is the placement of paints and powders upon one's face. I used to have a little saying when I was a fashion stylist. I used to say, a little bit of powder and a little bit of paint makes a girl exactly what she ain't. And that's interesting because that is the whole point behind wearing a mask or wearing, for example, a robe in a ritual, is to become something else in that moment within the ritual. If you're playing a character, just like being on stage in a theatre performance. Theatre is rooted in ritual. We've covered this off in Dragonology previously. How theatre evolved was initially out of a ritual performance where an actor played a role within a ritual, and that became a performance. Dance and music, all rooted in ritual. Much the same way, the use and application of makeup is all rooted in ritual, and it's a daily ritual for most women on this planet, particularly when you've got to go out and face the world, perhaps in a client-facing job or whatever, or even just to make yourself feel better, perhaps to impress someone, or to dress up for a party. All of this part of ritualized processes. And then another extension of this whole body adornment, of course, we can extend this to the art of tattooing, which is very ritualized. This is part of a ritual process. Many ancient tribes used to tattoo their bodies as part of a rite of passage ritual. And of course, this can extend as well into scarification. Some people scar their bodies, some people try to scar their bodies. Even scarring your body can be considered adornment and decoration. Okay, putting patterns onto you for a visual effect is decorating. This is this is actually a picture taken in the 1800s of a Japanese man with the most incredible tattoo, particularly for that era. I must just say that's pretty amazing. And this is a native tribe, I think a Polynesian, taken from the 1920s, if I'm not mistaken. This is a depiction of the Indian haircutting ritual, which is the first haircut that children go through. It's a very well-known ritual in ancient cultures. In fact, the first haircut ritual extends into various cultures across the world. Again, the cutting of the hair is a symbolic reference to the sacrificing of the firstborn, because the word hair is etymologically opposite with the word heir. And of course, the firstborn son is usually the heir to the throne or the heir to fortune. And so this is what, instead, it's a substitute. Instead of killing your firstborn child, what you do is the first haircut is taken as that ritual. And this is what's going on here. So that even the concept of grooming one's hair is rooted in ritual. That's right. The whole product industry of hair, going to the hairdressers for a haircut, it's all rooted in ritual. So it's not just fashion, it's not just clothing, not just makeup, it's also the hairdressing industry. And this is illustrated very clearly in this wonderfully descriptive symbolic piece known as Father Time and the Weeping Virgin. And this motif actually turns up in Freemasonry, and it's symbolically very, very important. What it shows is Father Time with his harvest scythe. Actually, you can see him managing or playing with the virgin's hair. Here again, handing the virgin's hair. He's going to cut the virgin's hair. Again, representative of the sacrificing of the firstborn, because the word hair, etymologically cognizant and very similarly spelled to the word heir, as in the heir to the throne or the heir to the fortune, normally the firstborn. Now, ritual adornment and decorating, in one of its most obvious forms, comes at Christmas time. And that's when we get out the Christmas tree and we put lots of tinsel and baubles and decorations onto it, and we stick beautifully wrapped gifts underneath it. And this is, for me, when I think of ritual adornment, I think of decorating the Christmas tree. It's the first thing that comes to my mind. And it's something that most people just take for granted. They don't realize just how ingrained in ritual this activity actually is. Yeah, think about it. Well, people who acknowledge Christmas, what they do every year is they get a tree, or they pull out a fake tree out of their closet. They put it up. They then get out the box of decorations. They buy some decorations and they spend time decorating it. Okay, it's a ritual. It happens once a year. It's tied into the movements of the sun, so it's a solar ritual because Christmas is a solar holiday. So absolutely classified as a ritual. Then, of course, the concept of gift wrapping. is also a ritual, because what you're doing to the gift is you are in fact adorning the gift. You're decorating it. Putting that bow onto the gift is in fact an act of making it look pretty. So it's not just a random thing. Like, have you ever wondered why we do what we do? You know, most people don't understand why we wrap Christmas gifts, because most of the time I've seen children, after I've spent like so much time wrapping their gifts and making it look all pretty, they just rip that wrapping off. They don't care what it looks like. So again, why go to all that effort of wrapping those gifts? Why? Because it's part of the ritual process. It has to be done, okay? The practice of gift wrapping for rituals such as birthdays and Christmas is in and of itself an active ritual, which of course then again falls into the category of decoration or adornment as an active ritual. And of course then decorating cakes is an active ritual. In fact, anything where we are decorating to create an aesthetic appeal can be considered a ritual. Even the baking of a cake, because look at when we bake cakes, it's normally for special occasions. The most common time we bake a cake, boys, for example, on birthdays. Birthdays happen once a year, again, at a specific time. Therefore, it is a ritual. You bake a cake for someone's birthday. It's considered something that is done for birthdays, therefore a ritualistic act associated with birthdays. And then, of course, we spend time decorating the cake and making it pretty, adorning it. Ritual decoration and adornment. So technically, cake decorating falls into the category of ritual. And of course, the decorating of Easter eggs, that is a ritual act. Again, Easter being very much tied in with the movements of the sun. Easter is supposed to represent springtime, which is, of course, why we use symbolically eggs and we decorate and adorn them. But the decorating of the eggs or the adornment of the eggs is in and of itself a ritual. And of course, the whole concept of decoration and adornment is everywhere in all of these various dragonology-related holidays and traditions. Santa Muerta, or Day of the Dead, All Saints Day, which happens on the 1st of November, the day after Halloween or All Saints Eve. What you find is they have these things called sugar skulls, which is sugar molded into skull shapes, and they decorate them. So they adorn the skulls. Remember, we already spoke about the adorning of the dead. Okay, they put jewels and stuff. This is further extended into the skull candy, okay? The sugar skulls, where they will go and decorate them. And of course, the whole sugar skull culture has grown so crazy, as we've already shown you, that these sugar skull designs turn up in fashion all over the show. It's not just a traditional thing for Halloween or All Saints Day. Then we look at costuming, okay? Costuming is a form of ritual adornment, you know, putting on a costume for a specific occasion. We've already spoken about Halloween or All Saints Eve being part of a ritual tradition. And of course, when you put on a costume to celebrate these traditions, you are engaging in ritual adornment, the decoration of oneself in a specific theme appropriate for that occasion or that ritual. Another example of this, of course, would be something like Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras more tied into Catholic rituals of Lent. But interesting to notice the sort of themes that people choose for Mardi Gras. Very much, again, the Joker, the Harlequin, images associated with Dragonology. We've covered this in previous Dragonologies. But again, people dress up for the Mardi Gras festival, a ritual adornment celebration. In fact, all costume is a form of ritual adornment, whether it be Santa, someone dressing up in a Santa outfit and playing Santa Claus like an actor would play a character on a stage. They're in fact wearing that mask of something, somebody else. Over here we've got an Easter Bunny costume, as, for example, something someone would put on to celebrate that particular ritual tradition being Easter. Now we go into the whole symbolism in fashion, and I have covered this one off enough times for people to understand this, and that is the fact that obviously we find these dragon symbols turning up in fashion. Let's talk about high fashion for a moment, shall we? The House of Versace, the famous Italian luxury brand, gets its image from the Aegis. This is an Aegis. What an Aegis is, and I will go on to talk about an Aegis in a moment because I've got a slide to talk about it, but what is an Aegis depicts is normally a Gorgon, or in specific, the Gorgon Medusa. Many people may be familiar with the concept of Medusa as the woman with hair that was actually snakes. She had snakes for hair. Again, another serpentine reptilian allegory, but you'll notice here that she's got these snakes twisting around her neck, which is what this is over here in the Versace logo. These are actually snakes twisting around underneath her neck. And what you'll notice here are the wings on the head. Again, wings on the feet, wings on the head, wings on the staff, wings on the back are all representations of the dragon. Okay, that's a dragon symbol. So we see the wings on the head here in this stylized version of the Medusa head. Okay. Here's other versions of the Medusa head. You clearly see the serpents over here and how they twist under the neck. So this is what you've got going, twisting under the neck here. Seeing more clearly as serpents, particularly since they come up over there. Again, you notice the wings on the head, a more clear version of what's going on in these two pictures. This is a marble mosaic. You can see some of these serpents coming down under the neck, off the hair, and of course the two little wings over here, which of course give the indication that the Gorgon Medusa was in fact just a representation of a dragon. But what's interesting to notice is this representation of Medusa turns up in what is known as the aegis. This is an aegis. Okay? This is a mosaic of Alexander the Great wearing the aegis. Okay? Notice the face of the Gorgon Medusa with the snakes around her. Okay? The aegis is a symbolic indicator that the wearer of the garment is of the angel or dragon bloodline. Of course, this is the 1st century BC mosaic found in the ruins of Pompeii, and it shows Alexander the Great wearing the aegis. In other words, Alexander himself was of the royal reptilian dragon angelic bloodline. Here we go. This is a picture of Athena from Greek pottery wearing the aegis with the serpents coming off it. You can see the Gorgon face with the hair and serpents. And aegis, the idiom, under the aegis of, means it's a reference. It means being under the control, monitoring, sponsorship, or protection of some group or entity. And that group or entity is normally the dragons or reptilians. An aegis was also described as a serpentine garment worn by Zeus and Athena, and of course, as it's seen here, worn by anyone of the serpentine dragon bloodline, because they were under the protection of the serpentine dragon bloodline. Okay, they were decided by God, divine right of kings. This is where it comes from. This is an indication of the divine right of kings. They're under the protection of the deva, the deity, the gods, the dragons. So that's what it means when you say under the aegis of. We use this idiom in English. It's a reference to being under the protection or the control of something. But really, when you look at this, where this comes from, it's an interesting allegory. So let's take a look at where this aegis turns up. Okay, so we're looking at a very distinctive serpentine dragon symbol, which we've shown what the Versace symbol is actually. It is an aegis. It is the aegis of the Gorgon Medusa. And this is what looks to be based on a priest's robe, which of course has the top part, which is a hood, and then underneath part. I'll show you an example of this. Here's the priest's robe here. As you can see the top part with the hood and the underneath part. Very similar to what this outfit looks like here. This is an outfit that Nicki Minaj wore at the Grammys. And you can see she's being accompanied here by someone dressed like a pope to the Grammys. Interesting. If anybody saw this particular Grammys, it was very ritualistic. And this is where Nicki Minaj talks about taking on an entity inside her called Roman. Very interesting because, of course, using an entity inside her called Roman and turning up with a Catholic priest doesn't seem to be somewhat of a coinky-dink, you know, not a coincidence or anything, nothing to worry about. And of course, you've got an aegis on your garment, so you're under the protection of the dragon. Very interesting, Nicki Minaj. Says a lot about the fashion and music industry, doesn't it? Well, let's talk a little bit about other fashion icons that have some really dark pasts that need to be accounted for, because people spend a fortune on designer duds. I mean, what woman has not coveted the ever so iconic Chanel handbag? Well, let's look at Lady Chanel and what's going on there. Chanel uses the all-seeing eye symbolism as allegories in their advertising campaign, so you kind of know what their allegiance is. Okay, this is Lily Rose Depp, who happens to be the daughter of Johnny Depp and Vanessa Paradis. She's now the new face of Chanel. Here we have Kristen Stewart. You just have to look at some of the films Kristen Stewart's been in to know exactly that she has done a deal with the devil, sold her soul to the Hollywood hounds from hell. Now, what's interesting about Chanel is Chanel always talked about women should have black and white in their wardrobe and wear them contrastingly. A little bit of black, a little bit of white. Okay, she was also very big on pearls, but you'll notice the Chanel logo is normally done in black and white, as you've seen here, white and black, black and white. Now, for those who are familiar with this kind of symbolic allegory, think tessellated tiles, Masonic tiles in temples, for example, black and white, duality, light and dark. What is black is white, what is white is black. And as I said, the classic look of Chanel is black, white, and pearls. That was Coco Chanel's signature thing, black, white, and pearls. And of course, camellias. She loved camellias, and you can see one here, black, white, and pearls. And tweed. She loved tweed jackets, lots of tweed suits that she made. And the black and white duality, of course, as we've already expressed, shows up in architecture in the form of tessellated tiles, but also very commonly used in fashion. But also pearls are a symbol of the dragon. Go into Chinese dragon mythology and you'll find the dragon pearl myths turning up there. And in fact, the word pearl contains the dragon root word pair, linked to the group of words parler, meaning to speak, para, pala, pio, pair, pierre. This is all dragon root words. A little bit about Coco Chanel, because I found this very interesting. I'm myself a big fan of Chanel fashion. But to know a little bit more about the woman, this is from a book by Hal Vaughan called Sleeping with the Enemy. Coco Chanel, Nazi agent, because she was a Nazi agent. And of course, this ties in earlier on to the use of the swastika, because everything with Dragonology comes back upon itself and ties in thematically to each other. That is why it's such an exact science. But Gabrielle Coco Chanel, Coco was given to her because of her love of cocaine. Gabrielle Chanel, better known as Coco, was a wretched being. Anti-Semitic, meaning she hated Jews. Homophobic, meaning she hated gays. She was social climbing, opportunistic, ridiculously snobbish, and given to sins of phrase-making like, if blonde, use blue perfume. Ridiculous, but anyway. She was addicted to morphine. They don't mention her addiction to cocaine, and actively collaborated with the Germans during the Nazi occupation of Paris. Now, this is an article taken from The Mirror, a British newspaper, and I do want to read a little bit of it for you because it gives some interesting insights into what actually happened with Coco Chanel. So this is a mainstream newspaper. It's not even conspiracy rags. It says about Coco Chanel, she is best remembered as the woman who changed the face of the fashion industry. But there was another side to Coco Chanel. Newly discovered documents prove that she was a Nazi spy who shared a bed with a senior Gestapo officer and tried to convince Britain to end the war. The Nazis chose her to negotiate a truce with Britain because she was already friends with Winston Churchill. And that friendship may have been the only thing that saved her from the revenge of the French resistance after the war ended. Official Nazi papers found in French Defense Ministry archives show that Chanel was recruited by the Nazi Military Intelligence Division, the ABWA, and given the agent number F7124. She was also given her own code name Westminster, a reference to her affair with the Duke of Westminster 20 years earlier. Now, Duke of Westminster was the richest man in Britain, so it's pretty significant. This is definitely something that a lot of people would have preferred to put aside, to forget, and to just go on selling Chanel scarves and jewelry. During the Nazi occupation of Paris, Chanel lived in luxurious suites at the Ritz Hotel, which was also the French headquarters of the German Air Force. Okay, you don't get to live in the headquarters of the German Air Force unless you're on their side. She promptly embarked on an affair with Baron Hans Gunther von Dinklage, a high-ranking Gestapo officer who was honored by Hitler and propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels. He was also an intelligence expert who had been running espionage operations in France during the 1930s. Chanel was 57 when the occupation began in 1940, and Dinklage was 13 years younger. But the pair remained lovers for 10 years and fled to Switzerland together after the war. Chanel was prepared to use her German contacts to protect her wealth and also tried to exploit the grotesque Nazi Aryanization laws which banned Jews from owning businesses. The designer hoped to snatch back her perfume company and the rights to her famous Chanel No. 5 scent, which she had sold to the Jewish Wertheimer brothers in 1924. However, she was slaughtered when she discovered that the Wertheimers, who had already fled to the safety of America, had sold their stake in the business to a non-Jew, invalidating her claim. It is now believed that Chanel was enlisted into the Abwehr by the French aristocrat and German double agent Baron Louis von Fraudeland in the summer of 1941. He may have cemented her recruitment with a promise that her nephew Andre would be released from a POW camp. Her first mission was to go with Fraudeland to Madrid and help him identify Nazi sympathizers and recruit them as potential spies. Then in 1943, she traveled to Berlin with her Nazi lover to offer her services as a double agent to SS chief Heinrich Himmler. As a result, she was sent to Madrid on a second mission for Himmler himself. The war had turned against Germany, and some Nazis wanted to break with Hitler and negotiate a separate truce with Britain. Chanel was seen as the perfect person to do that. After all, she knew British Prime Minister Winston Churchill from her days as the lover of Hugh Grosvenor, Britain's richest man and the second Duke of Westminster, and also a known anti-Semite. The Prime Minister had been a regular visitor to Rose Hall Estate, their Scottish love nest, which Chanel had decorated. But the plan failed because Churchill never responded to her. British intelligence already knew that Chanel had quite literally jumped into bed with the enemy. Details of her meetings in Berlin were passed on by Nazi defectors. Or Churchill may simply have decided he had no time to talk politics with a fashion designer as the Second World War hit its climax. Historian Henry Goodell says, Chanel displayed incredible megalomania and naivety in imagining that she could change Churchill's mind. A fortnight after Paris was liberated in August 1944, two men from the French resistance arrived at the Ritz to escort Chanel, then 61 years of age, to the offices of the cleanup committee that dealt with Nazi collaborators. A few hours later, she was released. It was a narrow escape given her wartime exploits, especially as most women who slept with Nazis were paraded through the streets with their heads shaved. Several explanations have been put forward to explain why she got off so lightly. The French authorities were undoubtedly keen to deny that any of their biggest celebrities had done deals with Nazis, as they tried to reunify the country and restore a sense of national pride. They are also unlikely to have been privy to secret British files that reveal how deeply the designer had been drawn into the Nazi war machine. And it has been claimed that Churchill or even the British royal family intervened to ensure that she escaped punishment. Now, for that to happen, someone like Coco Chanel would have to have been a member of a secret society or of the elite secret clique. She's, as we see, she's moved with very high-ranking peoples, dukes and barons. She's basically protected from up on high. You can absolutely guarantee that this woman was involved in some sort of occult rituals, particularly given how the symbolism turns up in her fashion, if you know what you're looking for. And of course, Coco Chanel was not the only person who comes from a very dark past. In fact, the fact that she collaborated with the Nazis was what gave her all that money to build the House of Chanel. It's interesting because Hugo Boss also made all his money and came to fame making suits for the Nazi officers. Hugo Boss was a German designer who joined the Nazi Party in 1931, 2 years before Hitler came to power, because Hitler came to power in 1933. And of course, Hugo Boss created uniforms for all the senior members and of course created the uniforms worn by the Hitler Youth. That's right, the Hitler Youth were dressed in Hugo Boss suits. The company also used forced labor from Nazi prisoner of war factories. In 2011, Hugo Boss as a company issued a formal apology about its activities during the Second World War. So these big designers who are now very famous and have multi-billion-dollar companies, a lot of them, particularly the ones who were around in Europe at that time, they collaborated with the Nazis. And I will say that if you didn't collaborate with the Nazis, they put you in camps and they arrested you, whatever else. A lot of it might have just been self-preservation. Not many people had a choice at the time because there were people, even the kids are ratting out their own parents. So we do need to take into account the social climate at the time, but still, some of the biggest names in fashion come from very dark backgrounds. And that's it for me tonight. If you guys have missed anything, please do go check back any of the previous 11 episodes of Dragonology Season 3. It's an extensive journey and we've had quite an interesting season. So please, guys, do go back and check. There is only one more episode of the season left, being episode 13, and that will be coming pretty soon. If you want to get into Dragonology, if this is new for you, please go back and check seasons 1 and 2. They're available on my website, dragonology.info, and you can download a copy of my book, Dragonology Spellbreaker, from the website as well. That's dragonology.info, and if you use the discount code, you can get a €5 discount. That discount code being Dragonology S3. That's Dragonology Season 3. And if you've got any questions, of course, feel free to get in touch with me, Mel V, and you can email me at info@consciousconsumenetwork.info. I'm more than willing to answer any questions or queries that people might have about the subject matter, or just send a message to say hi. We'd love to hear from you. Please check out the rest of the material that Conscious Consumer Network broadcasts. Our broadcast guide is updated weekly and is available on our website, www.consciousconsumernetwork.tv. All the archives of all the shows are stored on our specially dedicated archive website, being ccn.media. And please do support Conscious Consumer Network. We are a publicly funded network and humanitarian organization putting out amazing content, working with amazing people from all across the world and dedicating ourselves full-time to the running of this project. Support the Network Support Fund for 2017 or go to the many different fundraisers we've got on our website and show your support for free and independent media. And as always, we do thank you for supporting free and independent media. My name has been Mel V, and as always, it's been a pleasure. We'll see you again.